Marcus Holloway, a former civil engineer aged 53, trudged through the bustling streets of downtown Seattle, Washington. The once promising professional now found himself trapped in a life he never imagined, homeless and struggling to survive day by day. The towering skyscrapers that surrounded him were a stark reminder of the life he once led, designing structures that touched the sky. Now, those same buildings cast long shadows over his existence. The neighborhood of Belltown, where Marcus currently wandered, was a mix of trendy restaurants, high-rise apartments, and corporate offices. The air was thick with the scent of coffee from nearby cafes, mingling with the salty breeze from the nearby Puget Sound. The constant hum of traffic and chatter from passers-by created a cacophony that Marcus had learned to tune out over the years. As he walked, his worn shoes scuffed against the concrete sidewalk. The Seattle drizzle, a constant companion in this corner of the Pacific Northwest, clung to his tattered jacket. Marcus pulled the collar up higher, trying to ward off the chill that seemed to seep into his very bones. His eyes, once bright with ambition, now held a weary resignation. Yet, beneath the surface, a flicker of something, perhaps hope, perhaps desperation, still burned. Today was different. Today, he was on a mission. Marcus's mind drifted back to a time when life was kinder. He remembered the day he graduated from the University of Washington with his engineering degree, full of dreams and ambitions. His parents had been so proud, their faces beaming as he walked across the stage to receive his diploma. If only they could see him now. A group of young professionals hurried past, their designer umbrellas bobbing like colorful mushrooms above their heads. Marcus stepped aside, pressing himself against a building to let them pass. He caught snippets of their conversation, something about a project deadline and plans for happy hour. It was a world he once belonged to, now as foreign to him, as if it were on another planet. As he continued his journey, Marcus's thoughts turned to the reason for his unusual trek across the city. He had heard whispers, rumors circulating through the network of homeless individuals he had come to know. His niece Lily was getting married today. The information had stirred something deep within him, a longing for connection, a desperate need to see a face from his past. Marcus hadn't seen Lily in over a decade. She would be a woman now, no longer the pigtailed little girl who used to beg him for piggyback rides. He wondered if she ever thought of him, if she knew what had become of her once beloved uncle. The sound of church bells in the distance caught his attention. Marcus quickened his pace, his heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and fear. He wasn't sure what he would do when he got there or how he would be received, but something inside him, some last vestige of the man he used to be, urged him forward. As he walked, memories flooded back. Happy times spent with his family, holidays, birthdays, and quiet evenings at home. Then came the darker memories, the day he lost his job, the spiral into depression, the arguments with his wife, and finally her tragic death. It had all happened so quickly, a domino effect that had left him reeling and unable to cope. Marcus paused at a storefront window, catching a glimpse of his reflection. He barely recognized the man staring back at him. His once neatly trimmed beard was now a tangled mess streaked with gray. His clothes, donations from various shelters, hung loosely on his frame. He ran a hand through his unkempt hair, suddenly very aware of how out of place he would look at a wedding. But it was too late to turn back now. He had come this far, driven by a need he couldn't quite explain. Perhaps it was a desire for closure or maybe a desperate hope for a new beginning. Whatever it was, it propelled him forward, one step at a time. As Marcus neared his destination, the cityscape began to change. The towering office buildings gave way to residential areas and finally to a picturesque neighborhood dotted with stately homes and manicured lawns. He felt increasingly out of place with each step, like a stain on an otherwise perfect canvas. Finally, he saw it, a beautiful garden surrounded by towering oak trees. Elegant white chairs were arranged in neat rows, and an arch covered in flowers stood at the far end. People in fine attire were beginning to arrive, their excited chatter carrying on the breeze. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He hesitated at the entrance, suddenly overwhelmed by doubt. What right did he have to be here, to intrude on Lily's special day? He was about to turn away when he caught sight of her. Lily stood near the arch, resplendent in her wedding gown. She was even more beautiful than Marcus had imagined, her face glowing with happiness. For a moment, he was transported back in time, seeing the little girl who used to curl up in his lap for bedtime stories. Before he could stop himself, Marcus took a step forward, then another and another. He was vaguely aware of the surprised looks and whispers from the guests, but his focus remained on Lily. As if sensing his presence, she turned. Their eyes met across the garden. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Marcus saw confusion in Lily's eyes, then shock, and finally, could it be recognition? In that moment, Marcus knew there was no turning back. Whatever happened next would change everything. With a deep breath, he stepped fully into the garden, ready to face the consequences of his appearance and the weight of the past 10 years. The murmur of the crowd grew louder as Marcus made his way down the aisle. He could feel the weight of their stares, a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Some guests whispered behind their hands, while others openly gawked at the disheveled old man who dared to interrupt this elegant affair. "Who is that?" he heard someone whisper. "Should we call security?" another voice suggested. But Marcus kept his eyes fixed on Lily. She hadn't moved, her eyes wide with disbelief. Beside her, a tall, handsome man, the groom. Marcus assumed looked concerned and confused. As Marcus reached the front of the gathering, he finally found his voice. "Lily," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't let this moment pass without seeing you." Lily's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling up in her eyes. "Uncle Marcus," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The groom looked between them, realization dawning on his face. "Lily, is this Lily?" he asked. Lily nodded, unable to speak. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, until she was standing right in front of Marcus. She reached out a trembling hand to touch his face, as if making sure he was real. "It's really you," she said, her voice breaking. We thought you were dead." Marcus finished for her with a sad smile on his face. "There were times I wished I was, but I'm here, Lily. I'm here with you." Without warning, Lily threw her arms around him, not caring about her pristine white dress or the gasps from the crowd. Marcus hesitated for a moment before wrapping his arms around her, holding her tight as she sobbed into his shoulder. "I've missed you so much," Lily cried. "Where have you been? What happened to you?" Marcus pulled back, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It's a long story. I'm not sure I have the right to tell it on your wedding day. I needed to see you, to tell you I'm sorry for disappearing, for not being there for you." The groom stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "Lily, sweetheart, are you okay?" Lily turned to him, wiping her eyes. "James, this is my Uncle Marcus, the one I told you about who disappeared years ago." James's eyes widened in recognition. He extended a hand to Marcus, who hesitated before shaking it. "It's an honor to meet you, sir," James said. "Lily has told me so much about you." Marcus nodded, uncomfortable with the formality. "I'm sorry for disrupting your wedding. I shouldn't have come. I'll go." "No," Lily exclaimed, grabbing his arm. "Please don't go. Not again." At that moment, an older couple pushed their way through the crowd. Marcus recognized them immediately, his sister Margaret and her husband Henry, Lily's parents. Margaret's face was a mix of shock and disbelief. "Marcus, is it really you?" Henry's expression was harder to read, a combination of surprise and something else, guilt perhaps. Marcus straightened up, suddenly feeling every bit the outsider he was. "Margaret, Henry, I'm sorry for crashing your daughter's wedding. I needed to see her." Margaret stepped forward, her hand reaching out as if to touch him, then dropping to her side. "Where have you been all these years? We looked for you. We tried to find you." The weight of the years, the pain and the loneliness, suddenly crashed down on Marcus. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. The carefully constructed walls he had built around his heart began to crumble. "I've been here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "In Seattle on the streets. I lost everything. My job, my home, my dignity. I couldn't face any of you after that. A hush fell over the gathering. The guests who moments ago had been whispering and staring now seemed to fade into the background. This moment, this reunion, had become intensely personal. Lily, still holding on to Marcus's arm, turned to the officiant. "Can we have a moment, please?" The officiant nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Of course. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a short recess. Please help yourselves to refreshments." As the guests began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves, Lily led Marcus to a quiet corner of the garden. James, Margaret, and Henry followed, forming a protective circle around them. "Uncle Marcus," Lily began, her voice soft but firm. "I don't care where you've been or what's happened. You're here now, and that's what matters." Marcus shook his head, the weight of his past pressing down on him. "You don't understand, Lily. The things I've done, the person I've become. I'm not the uncle you remember." Margaret stepped forward, her eyes brimming with tears. "Marcus, we're your family. Whatever has happened, we can face it together. Please let us help you." Henry nodded in agreement, though Marcus noticed he couldn't quite meet her eyes. There was something there, tension that went beyond the surprise of this unexpected reunion. James, sensing the delicate nature of the situation, spoke up. "Mr. Holloway, I know we've just met, but Lily has told me so much about you. You are like a second father to her growing up. Whatever has happened in the past, you're still family." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the kindness and acceptance. It was more than he had dared to hope for, but there was still so much they didn't know, so much pain and betrayal that lay between them. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "There's something you need to know, something that changed everything." Lily squeezed his hand encouragingly. "Whatever it is, Uncle Marcus, we can handle it. Please tell us." Marcus took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to reveal. He looked at each of their faces. Lily's open and loving, James's curious and supportive, Margaret's hopeful and tearful, and Henry's face masked with barely concealed panic. "It's about the family inheritance. The money that was supposed to be shared among us all. The money that could have saved me when I lost everything." Margaret's brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about, Marcus? What inheritance?" But Henry's reaction told a different story. His face had gone pale, and he seemed to be struggling to find words. Marcus pressed on, years of pent-up anger and hurt finally finding an outlet. "The inheritance that was kept from me, the money that could have helped me get back on my feet when I lost my job and Sarah died. The money that Henry and the executors of our parents will decided I wasn't fit to receive." A collective gasp went up from the small group. Lily's hand flew to her mouth in shock, while Margaret turned to her husband, disbelief written across her face. "Henry," she questioned, her voice barely above a whisper, "what is he talking about?" Henry's composure finally cracked. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting between Marcus and his wife. "I can explain," he stammered, but Marcus wasn't finished. The floodgates had opened, and years of pain and resentment came pouring out. "Do you have any idea what I've been through?" he demanded, his voice rising. "The humiliation, the struggle just to survive day to day, and all the while there was money, my money, that could have changed everything." Lily, tears streaming down her face, turned to her father. "Dad, is this true? Did you really keep Uncle Marcus's inheritance from him?" Henry's shoulders sagged in defeat. "It's complicated," he began, but Marcus cut him off. "What's complicated about it?" Marcus spat. "You made a decision that ruined my life. You left me to rot on the streets while you lived in comfort. How could you do that to your own brother-in-law?" The tension in the air was palpable. The joyous atmosphere of the wedding had evaporated, replaced by a heavy cloud of shock and betrayal. In the distance, the other guests watched curiously, sensing that something momentous was unfolding. Margaret, her face a mask of hurt and confusion, stepped between her husband and her brother. "I need you to explain this now." Henry looked around desperately as if seeking an escape, finding none. He sighed heavily. "It wasn't just my decision," he began. "The executors of the will, We were worried about Marcus's state of mind after Sarah died. He was drinking heavily, making rash decisions. We thought we were protecting him by withholding the money until he was in a better place. Protecting me? Marcus laughed bitterly. By leaving me destitute, by taking away my last lifeline. Lily, who had been quietly processing everything, suddenly spoke up. But Dad, even if that was the original intention, what about all these years Uncle Marcus has been living on the streets? How could you let that happen if you knew there was money that could help him? Henry had no answer for that. He stood there, the weight of his actions visible in the slump of his shoulders and the pain in his eyes. James, who had been silently observing, cleared his throat. I think, he said carefully, that this is a conversation that needs to happen, but perhaps not here, not now. This is supposed to be a day of celebration, of new beginnings. His words seemed to break the tension slightly. Lily nodded, wiping her eyes. James is right, Uncle Marcus, she said, turning to him with determination in her eyes. I want you to stay, to be part of this day. We can figure everything else out later, but right now, I just want my family together. Marcus felt torn. Part of him wanted to run, to disappear back into the anonymity of the streets where he didn't have to face the pain and complications of his past. But another part, a part he thought had died long ago, yearned for connection, for family. I don't know if I can, he said hesitantly. I don't belong here in this world anymore. You do belong here, Lily insisted. You're my uncle, your family. Please stay. Margaret nodded in agreement. Marcus, please. We have so much to talk about, so much to make right. Don't disappear on us again. Even Henry, despite the guilt etched on his face, added his voice. Stay, Marcus. You deserve to be here more than anyone. Marcus looked at each of their faces. Lily's pleading, Margaret's hopeful, Henry's remorseful, and James's supportive. He thought about the life he had been living, the loneliness and despair that had been his constant companions, and he thought about the little girl who used up to look up to him, who was now a woman asking him to be part of her special day. With a deep breath, Marcus nodded. Okay, he said softly. The relief on their faces was palpable. Lily hugged him tightly, and even Margaret stepped forward to embrace her long-lost brother. Now, James said with a small smile on his face, I believe we have a wedding to get back to. As they made their way back to the ceremony area, Marcus felt a whirlwind of emotions. There was still anger, still hurt, but there was also a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope for reconciliation, for healing, for a chance to reclaim the life and the family he had lost. As the group returned to the ceremony area, the whispers among the guests grew louder. Lily, still holding Marcus's hand, turned to address the crowd. Everyone, she began, her voice wavering slightly but growing stronger with each word. I'd like to introduce you to someone very special. This is my Uncle Marcus. He's been away for a long time, but he's here now, and that's what matters. He'll be joining us for the ceremony and celebration. A murmur of surprise rippled through the gathering. Marcus felt the weight of their stares, a mix of curiosity and judgment. He fought the urge to shrink back, to disappear into the shadows as he had done for so many years. We're honored to have you here, Mr. Holloway, James said, loud enough for others to hear. Family is what today is all about, after all. Slowly, the tension began to ease. Guests began to retake their seats, though many still cast curious glances in Marcus's direction. Margaret and Henry moved to the front row, leaving a space between them for Marcus to sit with them. Marcus, Margaret said softly, hesitantly. Please? Marcus took the offered seat. The familiar scent of Margaret's perfume brought back a flood of memories. Family dinners, holiday gatherings, moments of laughter and love that seemed to belong to another lifetime. As the officiant retook his place at the altar, Lily and James prepared to resume their vows. But before they could begin, Lily turned to Marcus once more. Uncle Marcus, she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears, I know this isn't how you expected to spend your day, but I want you to know how much it means to me that you're here. When I was little, you used to tell me that love was the strongest force in the universe. I didn't fully understand then, but I do now. Love brought you here today, and love is going to help us heal and move forward as a family." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He nodded, unable to speak past the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. The ceremony proceeded, but Marcus found it hard to focus on the words being spoken. His mind was a whirlwind of memories and emotions. He thought of Sarah, his late wife, and how she would have loved to see Lily on her wedding day. He thought of the years he'd lost, the birthdays and holidays he missed, and he thought of the inheritance, the betrayal that had set him on this path of isolation and despair. As Lily and James exchanged their vows, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on his own failed marriage. He and Sarah had been so in love, so full of hope for the future, but life had other plans. The loss of his job, the mounting bills, the arguments that grew more frequent and bitter, it had all spiraled out of control so quickly. "Lily, take you, James, to be my lawfully wedded husband," Lily's voice broke through Marcus's reverie. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." The words struck a chord deep within Marcus. How many times had he and Sarah promised to stand by each other, only to let circumstances tear them apart? He felt a deep pang of regret for all the times he'd pushed her away, drowning his sorrows in alcohol rather than turning to her for support. As the ceremony continued, Marcus found his gaze drawn to Henry. His brother-in-law sat stiffly, his eyes fixed on the couple at the altar. But Marcus could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched in his lap. There was a story there, beyond the simple explanation Henry had given earlier. What had really motivated him to keep the inheritance a secret? Was it truly concern for Marcus's well-being, or something more selfish? The exchange of rings brought Marcus back to the present. He watched as Lily and James slipped the golden bands onto each other's fingers, sealing their vows with this tangible symbol of their commitment. Marcus's own ring finger felt bare, a phantom weight where his wedding band had once rested. "By the power vested in me," the officiant's voice rang out, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." As Lily and James shared their first kiss as a married couple, the gathered crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Marcus found himself clapping along, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth despite the tumult of emotions roaring within him. The newlyweds turned to face their guests, beaming with joy as they made their way back down the aisle. Lily paused briefly beside Marcus, squeezing his hand and flashing him a radiant smile. In that moment, Marcus saw not just the beautiful woman she had become, but also the little girl who used to ride on his shoulders, laughing with delight. As the guests began to move towards a reception area, Marcus remained seated, suddenly unsure of his place in this celebration. Margaret touched his arm gently. "Come on, Marcus," she said softly. "Let's get something to eat. We have a lot to talk about." Marcus nodded, rising slowly to his feet as he followed Margaret and Henry towards the elegantly decorated tables. Laden with food and drink, he couldn't help but feel like he was walking into another world. The fine china, the crystal glasses, the expertly arranged flower centerpieces. It all seemed so far removed from the life he'd been living. Lily and James made their rounds, greeting guests and accepting congratulations. When they reached Marcus, Lily enveloped him in another tight hug. "I'm so glad you're here, Uncle Marcus," she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "We have so much catching up to do." James shook Marcus's hand warmly. "Mr. Holloway, I hope we'll have the chance to talk more later. Lily's told me so many stories about you. I feel like I know you already." As the couple moved on to greet other guests, Marcus found himself at a table with Margaret and Henry. The tension was palpable as a server poured champagne into their flutes. "I don't drink anymore," Marcus said quietly, covering his glass with his hand. Margaret nodded, a look of understanding and perhaps a hint of pride crossing her face. "That's wonderful, Marcus. How long has it been?" 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days, Marcus replied, the count as familiar to him as his own name. Henry cleared his throat awkwardly. "Marcus, about what I said earlier about the inheritance, I know it doesn't excuse anything, but I want you to know that it wasn't a decision we made lightly. I want you to have it. It's yours. It always was. For a moment, Marcus couldn't speak. The implications of what they were saying washed over him like a tidal wave. It wasn't just about the money, it was about acknowledgement, about righting a wrong that had altered the course of his life. I don't know what to say, he finally managed. Henry slid a folder across the table. You don't have to say anything. Just take it. Use it to rebuild your life, Marcus. It's long overdue. With trembling hands, Marcus opened the folder. The figures he saw made his head spin. It was more than he could have imagined, enough to start over, to build a new life from the ground up. Thank you, he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. This changes everything. Over the next few months, Marcus worked with financial advisors and counselors to create a plan for his future. He found an apartment of his own, not far from Margaret and Henry's house. He enrolled in refresher courses to update his engineering skills, determined to re-enter the workforce. But more importantly, he continued to work on rebuilding his relationships with his family. There were still difficult moments, times when old hurts resurfaced or misunderstandings threatened to drive them apart, but they persevered, committed to healing the rifts that had kept them apart for so long. Lily and James returned from their honeymoon to find a changed uncle. They threw themselves into helping Marcus adjust to his new life, offering support and encouragement at every turn. Lily especially seemed determined to make up for lost time, including Marcus in family dinners, movie nights, and weekend outings. As the seasons changed and a year passed, then too, Marcus found himself settling into a life he had once thought lost forever. He secured a job at a small engineering firm, starting at an entry-level position but quickly proving his worth and moving up. He reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and even started dating again. Then, on a sunny afternoon 3 years after Lily's wedding, Marcus found himself in a place he never thought he'd be again, his own backyard, surrounded by family. The sound of laughter filled the air. "Uncle Marcus," a small voice called out. "Push me higher." Marcus grinned, giving another gentle push to the swing where Lily's 2-year-old son Tommy sat, giggling with delight. The little boy was the spitting image of his mother, with the same infectious laugh that had once brightened Marcus's darkest days. "Careful, you two," Lily called from the patio, where she was helping set up for a family lunch. Her belly was swollen with her second child, due in just a few months. Marcus caught the swing, plucking Tommy from his seat and swinging him up onto his shoulders. "Should we go see what your mom's up to, little man?" he asked, receiving an enthusiastic yes in response. As they approached the patio, Marcus saw Margaret and Henry arranging dishes on the table while James manned the grill and set out pitchers of lemonade. Sarah, Marcus's wife of 6 months, a kind-hearted teacher he had met through a mutual friend, was there too. The scene before him was so normal, so domestic, that for a moment, Marcus felt overwhelmed by how far he had come from those dark days on the streets when he thought he had lost everything. "Everything okay, honey?" Sarah asked, noticing his pause. Marcus smiled, bouncing Tommy on his shoulders. "Everything's perfect," he replied, meaning it with every fiber of his being. As they all sat down to lunch, the conversation flowed easily between them. Marcus looked around at the faces of his family, old and new. There was Lily, radiant in her pregnancy, and James, probably recounting Tommy's latest accomplishments. Margaret and Henry, older now but with a lightness to them that spoke of burdens lifted and wrongs righted. And Sarah, her hand resting comfortably on his knee, a silent reminder of the love and companionship he had found in that moment. Surrounded by the warmth of family and the promise of a future he once thought impossible, Marcus felt a profound sense of gratitude. The road had been long and often painful, but it had led him here, to forgiveness, to healing, to home. If this video has helped you connect more with yourself and inspired you on your growth journey, take action and subscribe to the Vidosta Inspiration channel to discover more stories that will fill you with motivation and hope. I would love to hear your opinions, so leave a comment telling me how this story has impacted your life or what reflections it has left you with. And if you think this message can inspire someone you know, Share it with your friends so they too can find inspiration and purpose in their lives.